So this is class 63 on the Golden Doves. It's going to be page 27. The section is entitled Semiology and Interpretation. So for those of you who are new to the channel, Torat Andalus is going to teach and does teach Torah in accordance with the wisdom of the Hachamim from Andalusia, Spain, in the days of Harambam and before Harambam. And what's special about this Torah is that the Hachamim of Andalusia always connected the Torah with modern ideas and modern trends, which is to say they didn't sacrifice the Torah, but rather they brought the Torah forward to the contemporary audience. And the great thing about Chachmei Andalus is you never have to sacrifice the traditions of the Torah and the wisdom of the Torah in order to explain it in a modern way, meaning you don't have to make a choice. Sometimes you'll see Torah taught in a very ancient manner, and that's good for some people who are okay with that. And then sometimes people say, well, we got to kind of keep up the Torah because, a lot of the ideas in the Torah, they're antiquated, they don't work in the modern world. So what's beautiful about Torat Andalus, this channel, but obviously Chachmei Andalus, is that they always were able to bring the Torah up to a modern audience and make the connections between contemporary ideas and the words of the Torah, right? So that's what we do here. We don't think you have to sacrifice either. We don't think you have to sacrifice intelligence, philosophy, science, contemporary notions. And we also obviously don't think you have to sacrifice Torah, or rather, you can connect the two. And that was the contribution of Chachmei Andalus. And that's the purpose of this channel, Torat Andalus. So let's study now Golden Doves, for those of you who have a book. For those of you who don't have a book, hopefully we will be reprinting this soon. Semiological knowledge is interpretive and subjective. So when you talk about semiological language, knowledge, that's language. That's language. Language are signs. So in Hebrew, we have the word siman. Siman means a sign. Semiological, semi is sign, right? So the thing about semiological knowledge, as opposed to graffiti, and you can see the old classes on graffiti, graffiti stands for what it stands for, right? So the hieroglyphic, for example, symbol of a cow is the actual cow. In semiology, you have to interpret the signs. And there's a certain element of subjectivity here, which is to say, we don't mean unlimited subjectivity. It doesn't mean you can interpret it any way that you just feel, no. But if you're a member of the reading public for whom the work was written, so within the context of that tradition, yes, there is room for subjectivity. And that's why we say, Shiv'im panim la Torah. There are many faces to the Torah. Emet, the Hebrew term for truth, implies trust, right? So emet has to do with emunah. So truth has to do with trust. Faith, emet also means faith, as does its English equivalent. So it is context bound. Emet cannot be grasped in the abstract. So in Greek thinking and Western thinking, there is an absolute abstract truth, and that abstract truth applies all the time, irrespective of any context. In Judaism, first of all, there is the idea of truth being context bound. I'll give you an example. Tragically, especially in the past, there was more military interactions between Israeli soldiers and Palestinian children. So sometimes they show you a picture, of an Israeli soldier aiming a gun at the Palestinian child, and you say, "Oh my gosh, this is absolutely horrendous, and it's horrendous under all circumstances." And indeed, most of the times when somebody's holding a gun to a child, that's a terrible thing and reprehensible. But of course, if the child is, about to, blow himself up or throw a grenade into a coffee shop and kill, innocent people, then holding a gun to a child may be a good thing. But you see, in the Western world, we can't accept that. We can't accept the fact that there's a circumstance where the context will change how you interpret the circumstance, right? So by us, emet is context bound, right? You look at the context, and based on the context, you make a judgment. Outside a specific context, it is meaningless. Rabbi Ishaq Arama, the great Toledot Ishaq, commenting on the verse, and your truth extends until the firmaments, noted that emet is valid only within the context of the created universe. Outside the real world, it is not significant. I'm going to read to you the pasuk in Hebrew. It's a Tehillim. It says, Ki gadol ad shamayim chasdecha. Your chesed, your kindness, is self-evident and self-manifest ad shamayim, until the firmaments. The ad shehakim amitecha, and your truth is until the shehakim. Shehakim is the outermost heavens. By the way, Yitzhak Arama was an incredible thinker, but one of the great Jewish philosophers in Spain. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs quotes him quite a lot, and for obvious reasons. So he says, what does it mean that your truth is until the shehakim? Because truth is always context bound. For example, you say we have certain rules of physics. Well, yeah, you have certain rules of physics within this universe, because God created this universe with those laws of physics. Those laws of physics don't necessarily apply everywhere. Maybe in Olam Haba, which is a reality, maybe that reality is governed by different laws, right? So maybe in Olam Haba, maybe the laws of physics that govern our existence don't apply in Olam Haba, right? Likely, there's different laws, or for example, the biological laws, right? The biological laws are context bound. Maybe Olam Haba, the Malachim perhaps are not subject to biological laws. So even the most fundamental scientific rules are context bound. A semiological entity must be thoroughly up, and that's the idea of semiology. So let me make the connection for you. Semiology, how you interpret words, have to do with connections, how you connect words, right? So, for example, you can say about a dog, his bark is larger than his bite, right? So in that case, the word bark means the bark of a dog, the sound that a dog makes. Or you can say that bark is very rough, right? Referring to the bark of a tree. So you see how words, the meaning of words are context bound, right? Right. So you can say that's a very nasty bark. Well, what do I mean by nasty bark? Do I mean a dog? Do I mean a tree? Now, words are constantly fluid, meaning it's not just homonyms. So you say, oh, that's a homonym. No, but all words are context bound and are affected by the words around them, right? Right? So Et Yaakov Ishu Beto Bau, that means family. Beto means family. So the people, Jewish people came into Egypt with their families. Bet Hamikdash means the temple, right? The house of the temple, Beto, the house of the holiness. So that's the idea. You see how, so in metaphysical thinking, there's just an absolute truth. Semiological thinking looks at language, and because the meaning of words depends on the context, and we know that because we're semiological thinkers. So when we interpret reality, we also say, oh, that's a child. Child is beautiful, but bad minan. If a child is about to throw a grenade into a crowd, yeah, you have to hold the gun to the child, and you may need to shoot to stop that, right? So you see how truth is context bound, right? Another example, you see a politician dressed, very well dressed, and knows how to speak and has a proper accent. Perhaps Justin Trudeau of Canada has beautiful suits. He's an excellent dresser, right? And he speaks quite well and quite eloquently and with a lot of confidence, right? So that's an absolute truth. He's a great leader. But Jews, we know how to look at the context of things, and we know how to put things together. So, right, Justin Trudeau, we look at his actions, we look at what's around him, right? And we'll say, well, the guy's a tyrant. He's actually a very petty tyrant who doesn't believe in freedom, right? Yeah. So the way we judge things, even in politics, we look at the entire picture. What is he doing, right? So metaphysics, oh, very handsome. His hair is combed very nicely, right? And then he had a BLM, there was a BLM protest and he took a knee. Oh, how compelling, right? But semiological thing, look at the entire picture. So this is a person who, suspended freedoms in Canada based on a emergency, right? So you see how you have to learn how to connect the dots and reach the proper conclusion. He's a tyrant. He doesn't tolerate dissent. He doesn't tolerate people who disagree with him. Whether you agree with the freedom convoy or not is really not the issue, is it? Right? You understand that. It's not the issue of whether you feel the freedom convoy is right or not. The issue is, how do you judge this person? So you see, he's a tyrant. But for that, you need context-bound thinking. A semiological entity must be thoroughly transparent, right? A condition of semiology is that ultimately significance must permeate the sign. Once the value of a sign is determined and the message decoded, the sign vanishes, right? So when you have a sign, right? Let's say the bark, that's a very harsh bark. So does bark mean the bark of a tree, or does bark mean the bark of a dog? So let's say it ends up it's a bark of a tree. That's a very harsh bark. I'm going to have trouble climbing that tree. So now you understand that the word bark is a bark of a tree. Once you understand that, the sign in a sense vanishes. That's why it's transparent. It's transparent in the sense that the sign is no longer there now that I understand what the bark is. From the point of view of semiology, the opacity of any given entity is a state prior to interpretation. So before you interpret the word, it's opaque, it's black, like the black letters on the Sefer Torah, right? Not an absolute condition, but eventually you understand the word, and then you have the ideas that are flowing from the word. Before being decoded, an entity is opaque. Reading, which is the decoding of an encoded message, means the significance has thoroughly permeated the script and rendered it transparent. So reading actually means to make those black letters, which are opaque, into transparent words, which generate meaning. Therefore, opacity is synonymous with undecoded. So when something is opaque, all that means is nobody read that letter. Nobody read that word. Nobody read that sentence. So it's opaque. It's not decoded. In this connection, it is worth remembering that the elements of the alphabet, unlike hieroglyphics and pictorial representation, bear no similarity to the message. So think of that. In hieroglyphics, you have a picture of a cow, and the picture of the cow represents a cow. So the picture never disappears because the picture is the cow, right? It's only in alphabetic thinking, in semiological thinking, that you don't need the word anymore, right? In the sense that the message generated by the word, right, makes the word transparent. The reason for this is that there is no relationship between sounds in language and the meaning generated by those sounds. So because there is no relationship between the sound and the meaning, you don't need the sound anymore once you have the meaning, right? Is that clear? Because if I say the picture of a cow means a cow, the picture never disappears. That picture stands for the cow, and that's the message. But in words, as noted, the meaning of words is fluid, right? So Bayit, Bet HaMikdash, Bet Yaakov. So I have to understand what the word is referring to. What's the message? Once I make that connection, I don't need the sound, right? Because the sound is arbitrary. Why is a bayit called a bayit? Could have been called a house. Well, the answer is yes, correct. It could have been called a house. The word bayit, language, linguistic symbols are arbitrary. There's no connection between the symbol, the interpretor, and that which the symbol symbolizes, the interpreted, right? The alphabetically written word, as opposed to the hieroglyphic word, does not indicate the real thing. It is a pure linguistic symbol. That's what symbolism is about. Whereas what truly denotes, that's what semiological symbolism is about, I'm sorry. Whereas what truly denotes a writing to be hieroglyphics is that marks are signs for things, noted Bishop William Warburton. What denotes a writing not to be hieroglyphics is that its marks are signs for words. In hieroglyphics, the basic elements, the basic signs, are actual pictures representing actual things. In semiological thinking, alphabetic thinking, the smallest elements are letters. Letters don't represent things. And it's only when you combine the letters together, and you need to use your mind to combine the letters together, do you have a word. And even the word means something based on the other words around it. The individual letters, which are visual marks, stand for phonetic sounds, which are auditory. So the letter A stands for the ah sound, T stands for the T sound, and so on, right? The individual shape of the letters is absolutely arbitrary and totally unrelated to the actual sound. Is there a relation between the letter A and the ah sound, or the letter aleph and the ah sound? No, it's completely arbitrary. Is there a relation between the letter gimel and the ga sound? No, it's arbitrary. That's the point. So you see, it's the arbitrariness of language and alphabetic thinking that allows people to, that's why people engage in alphabetic thinking are always using their minds and making connections. Everything is context bound, as opposed to hieroglyphics, metaphysical thinking, the Western world. Oh, a child is a child. He's always a child. This symbol stands for a child. The child is holy. He's a cherub, right? So that's the difference. Since letters are not icons, their significance is not intrinsic, right? So letter doesn't stand for anything, right? Letters become significant only through opposition to each other. So when you put two letters together, then you can have a word. Accordingly, a letter by itself is insignificant. Concerning the desecration of the Shabbat, the rabbis declared that writing must comprise at least two letters. That's why for Shabbat, if a person wrote only one letter on Shabbat, it's asur to write, obviously one of the lamitet melachot. He's patur, abal asur. For a person wrote two letters, he's hayab, because that's a minimum word. And in order to have meaning, you need to have a word. One letter doesn't generate meaning. Concerning the desecration, we said, since all semiological entities are significant only through opposition, they are context bound. So semiological entities exist in opposition to each other, and they affect the meaning of each other, right? That's context bound. Context. Significance is the function of interpretation, and therefore meaning requires interpretation. You have to interpret the situation. Look at the situation again. Look at, and I'm not being political here because I don't really care whether you like Justin Trudeau or don't like him. I don't care whether you like Donald Trump or don't like him. It's not relevant to me. I'm trying to illustrate points. I'm not trying to make a political message, please. Understand that. So again, you look at Justin Trudeau, very handsome, very well spoken, and oh, he must be a great leader. This is a great leader, right? Right? So, well, you have to, well, that's, if you're not interpreting things, then yeah, everything is just hieroglyphics. He looks like a great leader and he is a great leader. You see the hieroglyphic thinking there? The idea of semiology is no, interpret things intelligently, right? And by the way, as long as I am going to talk my political ideology. My political ideology is as follows, because I keep saying I don't want to talk politics, but I should. 99% of the world's leaders, and I may be off by a few percentage points here and there, 99% of the world's leaders are actual, real life, honest to goodness imbeciles. That's I really believe that. You don't have to accept that. That's my own view on politics. They're actual imbeciles. I mean, they are completely incompetent. They are completely uncredentialed. I can't speak more lowly about how I feel about most, but not all, there's exceptions, most politicians are just unqualified, incompetent, incapable of doing anything productive or useful for humanity. The fact that the human race continues to somehow exist is because of God's infinite grace and providence. That's my own opinion. Getting back now to wisdom. Okay. The Hebrew term for interpretation, peter, pe, tet, resh. Pitaron, petafresh. Right? Pitaron means a solution to a problem. Pesher, some sort of compromise, meaning you take account of different things and you put them together and you reach some conclusion. Implies the notion of compromise, like that. So a solution to a problem implies a compromise, meaning you have to look at both sides. And then after looking at both sides, you reach some sort of conclusion. Interpretation involves the integration of various elements. You have to integrate. Am I capitalist? Am I socialist? Am I communist? Am I wacky, progressive, left-wing, loony? So the answer is look at the different sides and try to understand the different perspectives, and then reach a decision. You may reach a decision that says A, B, C, D, but you have to consider the different aspects, right? In Hebrew, it also means lukewarm. The word mayim posherim, right? Posherim means lukewarm water. In a sense, interpretation may be conceived as blending different elements as when mixing hot and cold water. So when you want to interpret something, pitaron, or want to find a solution, you can only find the solution if you mix the different types of water. There's hot water, there's cold water, mix them together and then find the solution. You understand? Thus, to interpret is to integrate two or more signs and make a compromise. And oftentimes you have a compromise. Maybe the solution is not, completely on this side. Maybe the solution is not completely on that side. Maybe some sort of compromise, right? That's pesher davar. Shlomo HaMelech says, "Umikya hakam." What is a wise man? He is a person who understands pesher davar. He knows how to bring together the different elements, integrate them, and then reach a solution to a problem. Which contains them all, but is identical with none of them. So the ultimate compromise contains the hot water, contains the cold water. It's neither hot nor cold. It's something new. Just as lukewarm water is neither hot nor cold, right? So you see how you have to integrate different systems and reach an intelligent conclusion. Particularly after Plato, the Greek aletheia is truth in itself. Right, so aletheia is to disclose. So the actual disclosure is the truth. It is context-free for the Greek thinking, right? Of course. And therefore universally valid. So it doesn't matter. This truth is always the truth. There is no situation where this truth is not the truth. The context doesn't matter, right? It unveils and discovers the evident. All we have to do is discover that which is evident. Once we discover that which is evident, that absolute metaphysical truth, don't ever tell me that this is incorrect, and I refuse to listen to you if you have some information to give me. The earth is at the center of the world, obviously. So Galileo points a telescope into the sky and seems to find evidence to the contrary. No, that's incorrect, right? The truth is absolute and unchanging, and don't question it. The truth is static and absolute. Like Euclidean geometry, it transcends all context, right? There's always a perfect triangle and a perfect square, and that's the reality. There is no other reality. Ideally, this type of knowledge ought to be thoroughly descriptive and objective. So the purpose of knowledge is to describe the objective truth. There's no subtleties, there's no nuance. Therefore, the truth is essentially tautological, right? Of course, then truth becomes a tautology. The formula A equals A prime expresses the ultimate goal of this type of knowledge, right? So they tell you, for example, rights, right? We believe in human rights, right? Human rights always is only for our side, never for your side. There are no human rights for people who don't deserve human rights, right? Or who don't believe in our particular views. We will cancel you and we will not let you speak. We, the liberal, will be so unliberal towards you because you disagree with us. So the whole thing becomes one big tautology. So what is the right to free speech? The right to free speech is I will tell you when you can speak, and that's true freedom, right? Otherwise, we'll cancel you. But this is why studying Golden Doves is so important, because you see how it opens up your mind and it allows you to interpret the world that's going on around you, right? Opacity is a condition of ontology, right? So ontology means the real truth as it is. What is the ontological truth? We don't believe in a real objective truth, nor does science, by the way. Quantum mechanics shows that truth is a little more, the objective truth out there is kind of a subtle notion, because there's always some sort of interaction between the observer and the observed, right? But nevertheless, we're talking about metaphysical thinking here. So because there's a real truth, that real truth is opaque, right? It never changes, right? You notice by us, the letters are transparent because they allow us to generate meanings in the plural, right? By them, the hieroglyphic symbols are opaque. A cow is a cow, that's it. Ontological truth is as it is, right? Ontology demands total opacity and absolute autonomy. At the instant in which opacity or autonomy are penetrated, the ontological object vanishes, right? So I believe what my father meant by this sentence, absolute autonomy, meaning the object of which we're talking about, the objective reality of that object is autonomous from the world around it, right? So an object just exists, right? Right, so, but if you say there is no opacity, meaning it doesn't just exist, there's an interaction between that object and the world around it, and therefore it's not autonomous, right? The ontological object vanishes, and at that point, there is no ontological object. Ontology is the objective reality of the object. Ontological object means the objective reality of the object onto itself, independent of an observer, right? That's ontological reality. So of course, if there's no autonomy, then there is no ontological reality, because it's always going to be interacting with the things. Beingness and presence, which are intrinsic to ontological reality, cannot be permeated. So this object has a presence, it exists, it bees beingness, right? Right, and therefore it's like black, it's opaque. In order to be perceived as such, being must be absolutely dense and impregnable, dense and impregnable. It cannot point to something outside itself, right? And this is the article I recently wrote in Chakira about the metaphysical world and the semiological world, where since we view the world as semiological, we think that things point out to other things, right? There's a message in the way the stars, perhaps, or the way the sun and the moon, and there's a message that it's giving us. We have to read the message, right? Yeah. Ideally, it must function as a gravitational field at maximum density does. No ray of attention of the perceiving subject could possibly escape, right? So if you believe in ontological reality or ontology, then of course, it's like maximum gravity. It only pulls things in and then it exists unto itself, right? Like a black hole. Of course, a black hole is the most opaque thing. Objectivity is a total absorption of the subject by the object. And therefore, I'm going to tell you how to view this. I'm going to tell you how to view the vaccines. I'm going to tell you how to view the vaccine mandates. I'm going to tell you how to view mask wearing. You have no right to think. I'm going to tell you exactly what you should think. Right? So you see how the ontological view of the world refuses to acknowledge subjectivity and refuses to acknowledge diversity of opinion, right? And again, it doesn't matter whether you're for or against vaccine, whether you got vaccinated or not. I'm not a doctor, obviously, and I'm not trying to make an opinion or formulate an opinion about something for which I'm not qualified, but we will tell you what to think. You have no right to think for yourself. That idea, where the objectivity absorbs the subject, and then you become part of that object, right? That's what's happening here. And by the way, if you're on the side that happens to like what's being promoted by the elite now, and that's fine, understand that if the elite change and you're on the other side, you will understand the lack of freedom. So we don't want this. I could be the most pro-vaccine person in the world, and and all that, and still I would not want a society where the elite tell you, here's what you should think, and they totally absorb all subjectivity into the object, hence forbidding you to think independently, because this time you may agree with whatever is being promoted. Next time you might not. And where does it all lead to? Okay. To be apprehended as such, a being must be perceived as a totally autonomous entity. That which you're looking at is totally autonomous, free from the world around it. An ontological object cannot be context free. Like figures in Euclidean thinking, ontological entities are rigid with points and invariant distances from each other. Perspective, orientation, and distances are invariable. Of course, we know that this is nonsense. In the actual universe, it's not true. Space is curved, and there's non-Euclidean geometry is actually more prevalent than Euclidean geometry. So I said that's nonsense. I don't mean in all situations. Perhaps that was a little too strong. Euclidean geometry works in very, 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 very limited situations. No object could be perceived as dependent on another. In Euclidean geometry, every object exists independently. To conceive in an object as dependent upon another is to deny its ontological reality. So I think we're going to stop here. I hope you all enjoy the class, and looking forward to further classes on the subject.